Good evening, and welcome to a private showing.
Night Gallery was horror. It was America's version of horror, and this television series with its various segments and short stories ran from 1970 to 1973 on NBC. Despite lacking the same control as he had had on the show that was his pathway to fame, Twilight Zone, Rod Serling still contributed heavily to Night Gallery. The show's first 2 seasons had 1-hour-long episodes, which featured multiple stories, but by the 3rd season, it had come down to half-an-hour-long short stories. In this video, we will explore the creation, the various stories and plots, and the secret behind the popularity of the show Night Gallery. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
A blind queen who reigns in a carpeted penthouse on Fifth Avenue.
A look behind the curtain, the haunting genesis of Night Gallery. With stories from great authors like H.P. Lovecraft, Night Gallery, later titled Rod Serling's Night Gallery, was the spiritual successor of The Twilight Zone. It was set in a museum which then segued into the segments or stories being told. The show was created by Rod Serling according to IMDb, and starred talented figures alongside Serling, such as Larry Watson, Gary Collin, and Joanna Pettit. While the show would eventually be canceled due to creative differences between Serling and Universal, especially over the comedy sketches that were shoehorned between the segments. While it lasted, it had a good run with the fans, especially the first 2 seasons with Gil Malay's theme. Serling's social commentary that he would smoothly slide into science fiction and horror was appreciated by the culture of the time. People had moved on from a fear of nukes. This meant that Serling was poised, both professionally and due to the demands of the time, to take a more classical horror route. The show, however, had come into the world as a TV movie first, with an upcoming debut director Spielberg directing one of the 3 episodes alongside Boris Sagal and Barry Shear. A year after this pilot came the show. Due to the pilot's successful rating, 6 60-minute episodes were included in NBC's 4-in-1 experiment. But before we get into that, let's take a look at why the show's pilot was such a success.
Criminal hiding in South America. A monster who wanted to be official.
The horror unveiled. The story of the pilot episode since Night Gallery, much like the famous show whose coattails it was riding, The Twilight Zone, was episodic in nature, with the different episodes having no correlation beyond the intro. We decided to expand on the pilot to give you a glimpse into the world the show operates and scares in. We scare because we care. The original pilot's theme was composed by Billy Goldenberg, and the pilot premiered on November 8, 1969. This 2-hour-long TV movie had 3 segments: the cemetery, the eyes, and the escape route. It is no wonder that this pilot won Serling the Edgar Award, because boy oh boy. The art created by Yaroslav Gieber was used in the opening of the pilot, where Serling, acting as a museum curator, introduced the audience to 3 pieces of art that would be related to the segment. While this was dropped in the later episodes, for the pilot, the art played a direct role in the story. It was truly a nightmare captured. The first segment is called The Cemetery, which makes sense, since the story has several scenes in an old Gothic cemetery. Directed by Twilight Zone veteran Boris Sagal, this stars big names like Roddy McDowall and Ossie Davis, whose performances make quite the impression on young fans. Davis plays the caretaker of an old man who loves to paint, while McDowall is the gold-digging douche of a nephew. McDowall's character, Portafoy, is left seething, but helpless to do anything. The whole thing is shot in black and white, of course, but the charm of the actors is irresistible. Trying to get his hands on the money, Knives Out style, Davis's character, Jeremy, offs his uncle accidentally on purpose. That's when things start to go bump in the night. The last painting done by the late old man seems changed to Jeremy, but the caretaker sees no different. A case of Lady Macbeth's bloody hand, perhaps. Guilt is a wild thing after all. Even after Jeremy tries burning the painting, it returns, as haunted things do. Eventually, tired of his apparently insane and abusive master, Davis's character quits the job, and now Jeremy, McDowall's character, is alone in the big plantation-style house with his delusion.
Over their shoulders. The painting is called They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar.
Except, are they delusions? Because after Portafoy leaves, the painting shows the old man approaching the house. Jeremy tries calling for Portafoy, but it doesn't work. The open window and the pounding on his front door terrify him, and in his fear, while holding and screaming at the painting, Jeremy takes the good old tumble down the stairs, ending up like Gwen did in the second Amazing Spider-Man movie. Dead to the world, the door opens and lo, who would it be but Portafoy, who was set to inherit the estate, should all of the old man's heirs be gone. He hired a painter to paint different versions of the painting to get the gold, he explains. While some might say that the ending took away from schemes by someone after money, I think it makes it better. Not only is it anticlimactic that after such a tense sequence we see McDowell at the door, prompting an incredulous laugh or two, but it also drives home some social fear. If you don't treat people well and give their due, they might just come after you. Tone deaf in the present world perhaps, but definitely scary to the 1%, eh? Another fan has speculated it is horrifying to have one's dreams dashed, which is what happened with Portafoy at the start after his service of 30 years was rewarded with peanuts, and thus set him on this path, which in its own right is a chilling commentary on how anger at what one sees as society's injustice, challenged in the wrong way, can lead good men astray. The story's not over yet though, thanks to good old morality, and the need to show people to be on the straight and narrow. After all, poor repayment of faithful service can never be a justification for murder and usurping of wealth. Portafoy can't go unpunished. He has the same experience with Jeremy and the paintings, and the segment ends with the front door opening and Portafoy screams of terror. Fake it till you make it. Fans say this added to the horror aspect as this was not morality, but Portafoy's own doing when he said hatred outlasts death. By thus giving Jeremy the means to return, he sealed his own casket. The second segment, The Eyes, is where Spielberg works his magic. It was also the last performance of Hollywood icon Joan Crawford. She plays a blind rich lady who lives in a carpeted penthouse on Fifth Avenue. To be able to see for a few hours, she agrees to an experimental procedure that she has blackmailed her doctor into performing. Why did the good doctor have to be blackmailed? Because this procedure has never been done on a human. It will only give her sight for a few hours and will make the donor she has picked for her optic nerves go blind for life. But the irony is that there is a citywide blackout in her limited time with sight, which makes the whole thing useless. Though questions do arise when she steps out and still cannot see anything due to the blackout. Yet, perhaps this is where the viewer has to use some suspension of disbelief. Maybe her eyes are still adjusting. Who knows? The last thing she sees before she too falls to her demise, trying to see with her last vestiges of vision, is the sunrise. One must wonder if vision here is a metaphor for long-term planning or morality. The third and final segment centers around a fugitive Nazi commander who played God with who would live and who would die. While on the run, he frequents an art museum where he begins to imagine escaping into an idyllic painting of a man fishing. Eventually, running from the investigators looking for Nazis in hiding, he runs to the museum in a blind panic and begs God to put him in the painting. His wish is granted, except the fisherman painting had been replaced by one of a man being crucified in a Nazi camp. Stroba, the Nazi character, had been talking about that very painting with a Jewish man, Bloom, earlier in the episode. In drunken fury at Bloom's recognition of him, Stroba had killed the man. While certain fans have said this wasn't as captivating as the previous two segments, other fans have called it the strongest segment. Despite mixed reviews, the segment still tied into the painting and the supernatural horror aspects of the show, with some calling it the most Twilight Zone-like episode, despite the lack of science fiction in it. The acting in all three segments was marvelous and complemented the writing well. The second episode, aka the one after the pilot, came a year later and was an hour long. As mentioned, it was a direct reaction to the success of the TV movie. It had two segmented unrelated stories. With the same opening, the episode started strong, showing us two paintings that would later be expanded upon in the stories. Douglas Hayes directed the first segment of this episode, The Dead Man, which was based on a story of the same name, written by Fritz Leiber. The premise is that a physician is visiting a colleague who has apparently worked out how to use hypnosis to possibly eradicate illness. What happens is this. One Dr. Redford has been curing a man with a family history of hysteria, which is using his emotions to make himself ill. With each session of hypnotism, the man is cured, what we would today perhaps call the placebo effect. But the doctor is hopeful that this hypnosis can eradicate illness. However, at dinner, he realizes his wife is probably having an affair with his test subject due to how gorgeous the man now looks, which the doctor attributes to the technique he's been using. Now it's time for the final experiment, to see if the doctor can raise the dead. He kills the man using hypnosis, and then gives him the signal to break out of the hypnosis. Plot twist, the signal doesn't work. The other man is dead. Months later, The doctor's colleague examines the tapes and finds that Doc, Red used the wrong signal, perhaps subconsciously. Hearing this, the wife, now looking quite insane, rushes to her lover's grave and gives the right signal. Douglas Hayes' written ending is chilling, as Viola looks terrified as her lover's skeletal hands wrap around her husband's throat. The second segment of this show, or episode 1B, as it is called, is titled The Housekeeper. It is the story of a man who is dissatisfied with his wife and would like to replace her. His chosen replacement? The new housekeeper. Being a dabbler in black magic, he naturally tries to transfer the soul of the woman whose personality he likes into the body of his legally wedded but more importantly hot wife. This episode too was written by Hayes, but under a pen name. Some have said it is not the best episode, and I would agree, as the horror element is overshadowed by the 50s sitcom vibe it has. What happens is this: a man interviews a housekeeper in a bizarre interview where he asks some invasive questions. These include stuff like, does she feel envious of younger women? Delighted by her grounded replies, he takes her to lunch. There his wife, a beauty, is also present with another man, who is likely her lover. Despite having a high net worth, to her husband she appears ungrateful and selfish. He wants the housekeeper's personality in his wife's attractive body, and offers said housekeeper all of what his wife is set to inherit, should things not work out between them. The woman agrees and gets some supernatural serum while the wife gets a toad. A few days into the arrangement, the housekeeper turns in her notice and wants to leave with her money when the man brings out the toad again, determined to keep at it until he's done it right. Whether that means until he found the right woman to inhabit his wife's body, or him actually managing to do the procedure right, is left to the viewers to decide. The episode certainly feels out of place when pitted against later episodes, such as the one where a medical bag appears from the future and leads to a murder and a suicide. Well, that wasn't classic supernatural horror either. It still had some wackiness and Twilight Zone style fear, while this just fell flat. While there were no recurring characters in the show, except Serling at the start, there were notable performances. Unveiling the cast and characters of Night Gallery. As mentioned, due to the episodic nature of the show and unrelated segment, Serling's narrator happens to be the only common character across episodes. Yet, there have been a few notable appearances on the show. We have already mentioned one. Joan Crawford, the Hollywood icon, performed her last act in this show in the segment Eyes. Her performance as the rich lady without care for others was as brilliant as her other iconic roles. As they say, you know an actor is good when the audiences have no trouble hating the character, despite being in awe of the performer. Other talent hosted by the show include Diane Keaton of The Godfather fame. Night Gallery was one of the first roles she would play in Season 1, Episode 2 of the show, which was titled The Room with a View. Let's take a closer look at her character. She plays the nurse of an old man who is in the hospital and whose boyfriend is cheating on her with the old man's much younger wife. The man gives the nurse a gun and asks that she request her boyfriend look at it. The nurse currently does not know her man is cheating, but has said she can get quite angry when jealous. Another face seen on Night Gallery is John Astin, who plays a suffering husband tired of his wife's nagging in Pamela's voice. When she dies at his hands, he is glad to be rid of her voice. We also see Vincent Pierce, called a horror legend by fans, play a college professor in the segment Class of '99, written by Serling again. This is a chilling episode with extreme social commentary, which becomes more and more poignant with the passage of time. Pierce's professor is training a bunch of robots to pass off as men and rewarding them for prejudices. He is completely calm and in control when giving them directives which range from slapping one another to spitting in someone's face for being perceived as snobbish, to finally killing a robo student for failing to murder someone he was taught was inferior or different. Now, acting that won an Emmy for Outstanding Single Performance has to be included in the list. The segment? They are tearing down Tim Ridley's bar. The premise is simple. A washed-up salesman is haunted by the past, especially when they are tearing down his haunt from the younger, more successful days. He keeps going back to the past, but is unable to stay, having to return to the horrific future that is his reality. William Wyndham was a delight as Randy Lane, especially with heartfelt acting, where he points out how life can make anyone feel worthless when they look back and see loss and no rewards after decades of struggle. To tune in or turn away, evaluating the allure of Night Gallery. So, what do you think? To us, Night Gallery sounds fun. If not for the horror, then for the moving performances and the social commentary. It is no wonder that despite mainly getting critical acclaim when it aired, Today, the show has a cult following. Some fans say that the charm of the show is also in the nostalgia factor as much as the clothes and props are outdated compared to today's CGI and VFX. Others, however, have said this childhood favorite does not hold up when viewed as an adult, especially as the writing begins to go downhill in later seasons, and comedy sketches are introduced between segments, taking away from the seat-gripping terror. Sure, the show is a mixed bag. Some episodes are genuinely terrifying, like The Dead Man, while others are more social commentary, such as They Are Tearing Down Tim Ridley's Bar. Others, such as Class of '99, are a mix of both, but some segments cannot be called anything but comedy. The last bit is very out of place in a show such as Night Gallery, which is supposed to talk about the stuff of nightmares. The direction and writing are often spectacular, especially the episodes Serling himself wrote. Often, the greats of horror such as Lovecraft are adapted for the screen in this anthology series, which is a treat for any fan. While some have said that the series opted for more action movie-style sequences to compete with the times over fantasy and sci-fi routes, this viewer does not get that impression from the writing. It is grounded, even when it is fantastical, if in nothing else than human psychology. And that right there is what makes it so terrifying on a rewatch. Even if we remove the supernatural, many of the horrors depicted by the Night Gallery can unfold. A jealous girlfriend can, in anger, take up arms against her unfaithful partner, as is hinted at in The Room with a View. A man could murder a wife he finds annoying, Pamela's voice, even if she does not come back to haunt him. Prejudices can be taught, like they were to the Class of '99, and people hungry for power and money can turn against their friends, as was depicted in The Little Black Bag. This is not to say that that is all what the Night Gallery is about, but like all good horror, it has some roots in reality. Another important aspect of the show is the painting, which are always a part of the opening montage and give the viewer some idea of what to expect going forward. They essentially set up the expectations for the episode, which is a marvelous use of props and storytelling. There's no wonder then that for Night Gallery, we have a marvelous verdict. With a good deal of the 70s campiness, this show was the spiritual successor of The Twilight Zone, despite many calling it inferior to the titular show. Serling might not have outdone his work in that show, yet his writing in the Night Gallery alongside other writers, with great directors such as Spielberg, Sagan, and Schwartz, bringing his vision to life, is exceptionally entertaining more often than not. With the depth of the subject matter and the gore and horror presented, it tackles quite a few subgenres of horror, such as social horror, bodily horror, and more. Many have said that the show uses classic horror tropes only, which feels like a reductionist view, but to each their own. At the end of the day, this one is a classic of a show, and if you are a fan of deep and serious subject matter with 70s style horror, which might not scare you today, but will still leave a mark and get you thinking, Night Gallery is a must-watch. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.